Well, hello and thanks for tuning in to this online discussion about the Hate Crime and Public Order Scotland Bill. Over the next few weeks, Free to Disagree will be speaking to people from different walks of life and different professions who've commented on the Hate Crime Bill in the last few months. For people who haven't been following developments or for some reason haven't heard of the Hate Crime Bill, here's a short recap. The government published the Hate Crime and Public Order Scotland Bill in April this year, saying that it aims to consolidate and extend existing hate crime law to ensure that it's fit for the 21st century. Now, consolidating existing laws is logical and hasn't proved controversial. However, there is a lot of concern over draft stirring up of hatred offences in Part 2 of the bill, which are thought to threaten free speech in Scotland and actually in the UK more widely as well. Part 2 of the bill would make threatening or abusive conduct and inflammatory material that is likely to stir up hatred against different groups a criminal offence punishable by up to 7 years in prison. Free to Disagree points out that these provisions are vague and subjective. The term abusive is synonymous with insulting and would create a low threshold for offending. And the term hatred is actually something that's very difficult to define as well. We fear that merely offensive speech and controversial debate could be caught by the new offences. And perhaps most alarmingly, we note that committing an offence does not require any intent on the part of the offender. This means that people charged with an offence can be charged with an offence without intending to stir up hatred or even being aware that their actions could result in hatred being stirred up. Now, that was a fairly lengthy recap, but there you go. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by two men from the world of journalism who are going to give their thoughts on the legislation. Ian Murray is Executive Director of the Society of Editors, and John McClellan is Director of the Scottish Newspaper Society. Thanks for joining me today, both of you. I'll start just by asking you to say a little bit about yourselves and the organisations you represent. John, do you want to go first?
Sure. The Scottish Newspaper Society is a trade association which represents publishers large and small across Scotland, from the smallest independent up to the Scottish editions of the multinational publishers. And so you know, we cover a broad spectrum of publishing interests, and the association allows the industry to speak with a cross-title voice that is not concerned with the individual content of each publication. And myself, I'm a journalist. Was former editor of the Edinburgh Evening News, Scotsman, and Scotland on Sunday. And I have a academic position teaching journalism and media law at Stirling University. And in the interest of full disclosure, I'm also a member of the Conservative Party, and I'm a serving Conservative councillor in the City of Edinburgh.
Thank you. Ian?
Yes. Hello, Jamie. I'm the Executive Director of the Society of Editors. As we are a UK-wide campaigning organisation with strong representation in all four nations. We look at in all four nations. And our aim is to campaign on the issues of press freedom, freedom of expression, the public's right to know, diversity in newsrooms, and the high standards of training for journalists throughout the industry. We are a broad church. We are cross-denominational in the sense that we have members that represent publishing, both local and regional and national. National papers are on our board. Also broadcasting, so we have the BBC on our board, we have Sky, and also the internet-only publishers that are there. I have been a journalist for 40 years, and mostly in the regional press and in the regional press of England. Great,
thanks very much. Now, I think I'd be right in saying that both of you are somewhat on the same page, if you'll pardon the journalism pun. When it comes to the Hate Crime Bill, you've both spoken about the threat to free speech and censorship, just to note just 2 points that you've made. Obviously, you're coming at it from slightly different perspectives. John, your focus is very much on Scottish newspapers in Scotland, and Ian, your focus is on UK media more widely. And it would be good to delve just into your views from these differing perspectives, which would be useful. Starting with you, John, what could this bill mean for journalists and editors on the ground in Scotland, in your view?
I actually think that much of the attention that this bill has attracted has focused on the likelihood of convictions, and rather than investigations and prosecutions. It's all very well for the government to say that the legislation will include defences and exclusions for publishers, which would mean that being found guilty of any of these offences would be very difficult. Now, whilst I don't agree that that's necessarily the case anyway, the point is that the caveats that they have included or might strengthen don't prevent investigation and don't prevent prosecution. And we see that in civil law, where there may be defences, in particular, for example, in defamation, but those don't prevent actions. And my belief is that because of the nature of this bill, that what it will result in complaint after complaint after complaint by people with an axe to grind against news publishers and publishers of all shapes and sizes. You can see the J.K. Rowling stuff as a result of a tweet on social media. So what you will see is, if this goes through, is the opening up of an opportunity for people with all kinds of views to attack people whose views with which they disagree, and to subject them to police investigation. And because of the visceral political nature of much of what's going on right now, those complaints will in large part be politically driven, and the very fact that there will be an investigation will be enough to close people down, even if there isn't a successful prosecution at the end of it. And as publishers, we know how many complaints we receive from people who just disagree with something that's appeared in the pages or on the websites and broadcasts or whatever. This gives an avenue to turn every one of those complaints into a police complaint, which by its nature will draw in officers. I mean, with my counsellor hat on, I know of one case where the existing offensive behaviour legislation has been used to make a complaint against somebody, who was then subjected to a police investigation, which lasted for months. Now, eventually, the police decided there was no case to answer and the matter is closed. But it created months of concern and worry for this individual. And this legislation ramps that up to an extraordinary degree. And it will easily, I think I said to somebody not that long ago, desk sergeants in police stations will have to organise a queue with the level of complaints which police would receive, because you only have to have a glance at social media to see how many angry people there are out there about somebody whose views with which they disagree. This gives the opportunity to give those people a legal tool to close down arguments that they don't like. And I think, as the Faculty of Advocates have observed, it is so flawed and so loose that it's not amendable. They really need to start again.
Yeah, I mean, that's very chilling. And I think I remember reading a submission by Police Scotland quite maybe a year or so ago on the bill, where they talked about the potential for vexatious complaints, which seems to be what you're talking about, which would not only be problematic for people who are complained about getting caught up in a legal process, but also a waste of resources for the police, which is always stretched as it is. Now, going to you, Ian, you've stressed that the legislation could catch people outside Scotland, south of the border. You warned about this in May this year. Can you just elaborate on that point and maybe answer some of what John was saying there?
Yes, certainly, Jamie. Yes, it will. Let me emphasise and stress again that obviously the Society of Editors is very concerned about anything that goes on in any of the individual nations. It's not like it's north of the border, so we're not interested.
Sure.
But we certainly are. But I'm backing everything that John has said there, and I completely agree. And as I was an editor for at least 2 decades, know exactly the kind of reaction which has only grown and ramped up. From a UK-wide situation, it's going to have a massive chilling effect in several ways, really. You're going to have, of course, a lot of broadcasting, a lot of publication, a lot of online publications, of course, are seen throughout the whole of the United Kingdom. It's going to create all kinds of stresses and problems for newspapers, for instance. Let's just take those that publish, even if they publish Scottish editions, are going to have to think about, well, we're going to have to be very careful here that what we put in the Scottish editions is different to what we put in English. It's all going to become too much difficulty, and then you throw in what John has just been saying about all the actions that are there and tying up everything and resources, and that's what these people will want to do, is constantly drain the papers and shut them up. Basically, is to say, look, it's just, the lawyers will be saying it's just not worth going there. Whether this is a publication that is solely north of the border or covers the whole of the United Kingdom or a broadcast or something, don't go there because it's just not worth it. Let's pick our battles. It will drain us financially. It could destroy some smaller publishers, and so it will be a case of we don't put anything in which is controversial. Now, there's also the fact that we know in England that the Law Commission for England and Wales is looking at currently consulting on possible expansion of the English hate crime law. So what is perhaps adopted in Scotland might be seen as being, well, if they have it in Scotland, why don't we have it here? Perhaps not under the present Conservative government, but if there's inevitably eventually a change of government south of the border as well and for the whole of the United Kingdom, you can see that there may well be that they would adapt and follow, not be so friendly towards freedom of expression. And we use the term vexatious complaints and action and everything, but in some senses, yes, there will be those for political reasons want to think here's some way that we can close down the debate. But as we know by just simply looking at social media, there will be a lot of people who feel very passionate and I shouldn't be insulted, or I feel insulted on behalf of this group of people. And they'll feel passionate. They're not being vexatious. They're actually doing it because they believe it. And we have this, overturning of what has been understood, perhaps not liked in some quarters, is there is no right not to be offended in the United Kingdom, wherever it is. There's no right to not be offended. I might be offended. I often am offended when I read things or hear things or hear debates and everything. I'm really offended, but I understand that you have the right. You have the right to say that, and I will, if I wish to debate, come back and say why I think you're wrong. So there's an awful lot of things that's there, but often we fall into the case as well of the laws of unintended consequences. If we take it at face value, and I've got no reason for thinking otherwise, that the Scottish Justice Secretary and the Scottish Government is doing this because it believes that it's necessary, although it does. It has said that it has no evidence in a lot of cases whether it's actually needed. It's just putting down a marker, virtue signalling. This is the kind of society we expect. So we haven't got a problem with it at the moment, but we don't want to get one in the future, kind of thing. But if that's it, it's naive to think that once the police are given powers, that they won't use them. And we've seen this. We see this when there were the anti-terror laws that were brought in with RIPA. And the police then began to use those laws for nothing at all to do with anti-terror. If they've got it there, they will do it. And also, very much in the political climate that we've got today, that John just mentioned there, and the need to be seen to be doing something, particularly around certain topics, it's also naive for the police to say, nothing to see here, move along. We don't. In other words, they'll be expected, or they'll believe they'll be expected to, and then you're straight into all of that because they can put their hands up and say, well, look, complaints came in, we looked into them, and all those resources and all the harm that's caused because it's virtue signaling that's there, and it's box ticking and all that kind of thing. And what will it achieve? It'll, the very discussions that probably do need to be taken down, shall we say, and to be stopped, will still be going on in social media. still be going on there because those won't be caught, will they? Well, perhaps they should be, but they won't be.
I think the reality from the police point of view is that they won't have to be proactive in the way that this law would be administered, because they will be the recipients of so many complaints they won't have to look for them. Their problem will be the political pressure to act, and to use an entirely different example, when a new lower speed limit was introduced in Edinburgh, the police made it clear that it wasn't really going to be a priority for them, but they came under immediate political pressure to make sure that they were enforcing it, and so police resources are diverted to making sure that this happens. And it having been established in law, then the police then don't have the ability to then say, well, we're not going to police it, because that's what they're paid to do. They are there as the enforcement arm of legislators, and if legislators have decided that this is what the police should be doing, then they will be bound to do it. And given that they will receive lots and lots of complaints, because we know they will, then they will have to demonstrate that they are taking those complaints seriously. They will have to investigate them, and will have to investigate them thoroughly and properly, and be able to be open and transparent about how they did so. They cannot be seen to be just dismissing these things because they don't like the principle of it, which we know they don't. So it puts the police in a completely invidious position, where they would be expected to carry out as rigorous an investigation into these complaints as they would do for common assaults, housebreaking, or whatever.
Yeah.
But the people on the end of it will be people with an opinion. And to go back on Ian's point about the chilling effect on publishers, from a publishing point of view, it's unpoliceable, because you'll never know when you are likely to have caused somebody offence. The only way that you could avoid a complaint would be not to publish any opinion at all, because by its nature, an opinion will be something with which somebody somewhere disagrees.
Absolutely.
So it's commonplace for, despite what people might say, news publishers do not want to break the law unless it's absolutely necessary, in their view, in the public interest. It's not something that happens very often at all, because publishers want to remain within the law, because they know that it's not in their interests to flout it.
Yep. So
the reality is that opinion then becomes a weapon. And it's a weapon that in picking it up, you end up putting your face against the law, and it would be unconscionable for this law to be passed and to create those circumstances.
Absolutely.
I think also, I mean, you asked me to put it into a wider context around the UK, but there is an even wider context from that, which we've got this huge irony of the fact that the UK government is attempting to lead the way in the world with its campaign for world media freedom, and has also launched its committee, Safety of Journalists, which, full disclosure, I now sit on. So on the one level, it's got that, and we from the Society of Editors and others have wagged a finger at the UK government to say, well, you need to get your own house in order. We're not angels here by any means. If we're going to speak out to the world to say, come on, you regimes that clamp down on freedom of speech and allowing people to express themselves just because you don't like those opinions, you should open up. And yet here we are within the borders of our own nation, actually clamping down and actually creating the kind of situation where the police will be able to step in and arrest someone because they've had an opinion that just simply doesn't fit with someone else's opinion. I mean, how is that going to be seen worldwide when you're trying to tell, or I won't name any of the big dictators and others around the world. We try to tell them you've got to have freedom of speech, freedom of expression. Of course. And your own borders, UK.
Yeah, that's quite a dark irony, that. And I think I made a similar point in an article a while ago where I noted that what's happening in Hong Kong and the crackdown there on free speech and free expression, and actually thinking that Hong Kong citizens might come to the UK in order to escape the Chinese regime and find themselves in Scotland, and there's a threat to free speech there as well. And that's kind of a sad thought. That sticking with this theme of malicious complaints, I came across someone this morning, actually, which I thought was very telling. And initially, I thought it was so strange that I thought it was a spoof. But it's a letter to the Courier, which is a newspaper in Dundee, which I imagine John might buy if he's in that sort of area. There's a letter in it on the 25th of August from Atheists Scotland, so a group coalition of atheists. And the convener, Ian Stewart, says there's actually some merit in Humza Yousaf's legislation. I'll just read a quote from it. He says, "We fully intend to monitor all holy books, sermons in places of worship, and the social media accounts of the various religions, and report any hatred to Police Scotland for criminal investigation." So, there you have somebody just carte blanche saying, I'm going to use this law for my own political ends because I don't like religion. Now, I wondered at first if that was some kind of hoax because it was so deliberate, but he doesn't seem to be joking. And as you both have said, this law does play into the hands of people who want to enforce their own political ideals and actually shut down opponents. And the idea of church sermons being listened to, or social media accounts of Christians or Muslims being looked at and then reported directly to the police as a hate crime, that's really, really chilling.
Yeah, I suspect, I haven't seen the letter, but judging by what you just read, I suspect it's not a spoof, but I suspect it's very sarcastic.
Yes, it could be sarcastic. I hope that it is.
I would have thought so.
Yeah. I mean, of course, the Holyrood government have basically said that there will be, in the bill, will specifically permit discussions of criticisms of religions and of sexual conduct or practices, which sounds absolutely fine. And when we wrote to the Scottish Justice Secretary and received a reply full of assurances that the press are not the target of this, and this is not stifling freedom of speech and whatever. But even if you take that clause there, that will specifically permit discussions or criticisms of religions or sexual conduct or practices, that even if that is held to be true, that is not going to prevent organisations, bodies and individuals from coming to the police and saying, well, I think that this is here, and they'll have to spend all their time and resources investigating it. Because as John was saying, they can't be seen not to be. Yeah, and that's the problem.
In defamation law, and I'll come on to this, the irony of this, in defamation law, there are a series of defences, and which you can deploy, which will mean you will not be found against. In order to make sure those tests are applicable, that's why you have court hearings. That's why there are procedures to see whether or not those tests were appropriate at that point. And Ian's point is absolutely correct. The fact that there are defences do not prevent investigations. Time-consuming, worrying investigations, during which time the vast majority of publishers in the end of any kind of proceedings will not discuss the matter in hand because it's subject to an investigation. So even if you didn't actually get prosecuted, it doesn't mean to say that nothing would happen. And the reason I think it's ironic is that the Scottish government is at the moment piloting the defamation reform bill through through Holyrood. In fact, I gave evidence to the Justice Committee only yesterday, and the defamation and malicious publications bill, if enacted, will bring the defamation law into line with the rest of the UK and the 2013 Act in England and Wales. It's a liberalising law which recognises the need to improve the law in Scotland to meet up with the modern understandings of freedom of expression. So on one hand, you have the Scottish Government tabling legislation which is very welcome and is liberalising and has freedom of expression at its core, and at the same time is introducing legislation which goes much, much further in removing the right to freedom of expression. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense at all.
And I think one of the very risky areas about this is that unlike as an English law, the proposed Scottish laws would not be necessary to prove intent. So even if we know that some columnists will set out to raise the hackles of and have an opinion and which they know is going to upset people, but even if they write something or say something and didn't, all that someone has to do is come along and say, well, that has upset me. In these areas, I'm upset about that. They may not have intended it, but they've done it. And that's just impossible to police. It's impossible for the media to know that this is coming, that I've said something here which has upset someone. And also, yes, it gets to court, and you might look at it and say, well, look, there are strong defences here. We've had to go through all this process. But it only takes one court hearing and one judge to interpret something in a way that wasn't intended, shall we say, if we remain being open-minded about all of this. And then there's precedent that's set, and then it becomes an even harder battle that's there. And these are all, the pressure groups and organisations and individuals who are setting out to stifle debate on certain issues. They will be out to try and get that as much as possible.
Someone you said, Ian, I think in the press release in May, which you put out, was the proposals appear to be the perfect example, this is a quote, a perfect example of reversing the long-held understanding that no one has the right not to be offended. That's something that you said earlier as well. This conversation about offensive speech and whether or not it should come under the realm of the criminal laws is topical, and it's not just topical in Scotland, but kind of in the West as a whole. Do you agree that there's no right not to be offended in life? And do you think that free speech as a whole is under threat in other ways outside of the hate crime bill? Maybe both of you could give me your thoughts on that.
I'm happy to go first, John, on this one.
Sure.
But yes, I do agree that there shouldn't be any right to be offended. Look, society has over recent decades, in a relatively short period of time, but over perhaps the last 100 years, society in most Western countries has come to the conclusions of how far free speech can go. It's not a hard and fast. It's not a line of concrete that says, right, that's it. And the debate has up until now usually been about the nuance of that. Race hate crimes, for instance, in speech and inciting violence and everything. That society has decided that is going too far, and has that. But the rest of it, the idea that you have a right to not be insulted at all. No, sorry, that's it. And of course, comedians make their whole living out of it. There are a lot of popular commentators make their whole living out of it in that sort of a way. And so, the nuances are constantly changing around. But at the moment, we are going through a period of time where it seems that everyone is so sensitive. I'm not going to use the term snowflake. Oh, sorry, I've just used it, unfortunately, in that sense of, and all these safe spaces, and I don't want to have anyone, saying anything or reading any books or anything, say students, that might upset me or all those kind of things, and the debate that's going on. At least none of it's been put into law about that, and that's here where we have a real risk of this now becoming the law. We've got it also UK-wide with the online harms bill, which is being discussed at the moment, and the Society of Editors has been involved in that. And as with hate speech and that online harms, yes, absolutely, we can see there's a lot of work to be done there. The wild west of the internet, social media, and other things that are there, so that encouraging people to harm themselves, absolutely physically, some of the child abuse and all kinds of things. That's got to be curtailed and come in. Risk area is when you move into saying, and the government have said this, we want to stop the spread of disinformation, fake news. And then you get into who's deciding what's fake news? Who's deciding what's disinformation? And suddenly we're into 1984 and a Ministry of Truth. And it's creeping all the time. And it sounds wonderful to the public at large that we're trying to stop people being nasty to each other. Yes, that's what we're trying to do. And in that broad terms, it sounds good, doesn't it? Yeah, why should we be nasty? Let's stop people being nasty. And when you get down to the nitty-gritty, that devil is in the detail. But who has the right to actually say that your opinion doesn't count, mine's the one that's right? I'm on the high ground, you're not, and I'm going to shut you up.
Yeah, I think just before you answer, John, we carried out some polling recently. I don't know if you saw it, but essentially what we found is that vast majority of Scots support free speech, think it's an important right, think there's no right not to be offended, and I think that hatred means different things to different people. So there was broad support for free speech in Scotland, and also opposition to parts of the hate crime bill. But one of the stats that stood out to me was on the idea that offensive speech should be criminalised. And whilst more than 40% said it shouldn't, 29% of people said that it should. And I think that just shows the atmosphere and the culture that we have in Scotland, where this idea that something that is offensive, which is a vague term, everybody's offended by different things and at a different threshold, but that just speech that people find offensive should be criminal. And I find that quite chilling. But let's come to you, John. What do you think about the wider atmosphere, free speech atmosphere in Scotland just now?
It's abysmal. If ever there was a time for a law like this not to be introduced, it's right now.
Yeah.
Where so many issues which have been boiled into black and white are cutting across each other, and the levels of vitriol flying on both sides are at levels we've never seen before. And attempting to weigh into it with a law which just opens up the opportunities for that to be taken further, it's just mind-boggling. And there's 29% of people that you refer to, not be 29% of people who don't like something somebody else has said. So they would see it as an opportunity to find a way to close down the stuff they don't like. Now, that 29% will take into account all people of all kinds of different views,
sure,
and different things which get them hot under the collar. But nonetheless, it shows you that a third of the population, just about, are prepared to see a legal situation which would allow them to close down the things that they don't like. I mean, we hear it in with my political hat on. We hear this all the time. I find what you said quite offensive. That's offensive. It's the offensive itself is now a word which is used to close down, is already a word that's used to close down debate.
Yeah.
You say something which may be controversial, and then someone says, I find that offensive, therefore you should not have said it. And I mean, I could point to several people writing in prominent publications today who would unquestionably fall foul of this new law.
Several.
Indeed, if Rod Liddle ever came across the border, we'd have to bring his toothbrush with him. Yeah, he'd never see the light of day again.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Well, I mean, stats. The old saying of what happens in America, sneezes and Britain catches a cold, and we can see what the situation is that's over there. And I think it was the New York Times, in fact, certainly the New York Times, where a commissioning editor was fired for running an article where it was I think it was a senator. So it was an elected member of the American government who wrote regarding the rioting that was taking place that in his view, yes, the federal troops should be sent in. And for carrying that opinion piece, commissioning editor was fired. That's just madness. That's just madness. And if it spreads over here, then. But the irony of all this, of course, is that probably many of those 29% that said yes, anything that's offensive, will find that some of the things that they think are perfectly acceptable will be considered offensive, and then that'll be shut down as well.
Yeah.
Because everyone becomes a victim when freedom of speech and freedom of expression is taken away from you. And that's the message that needs to be hammered home. It's not the right, of the media who want to upset and insult people, supposedly. It's not the right of comedians to be able to pick on certain people and whatever and talk about those kind of things. It's not the right of the atheists, who want to close down religious conversations and practices that they don't like. It's the right of us all to be free human beings and to have freedom of expression and freedom of thought, because this is getting very close to a situation where it's almost a case of, well, it looks like you might be heading in that direction. So, about time we took action. It's very frightening, very frightening.
Yeah, I mean, I hesitate to use the term Orwellian because I think that's something that's overused. But yeah, as you say, I mean, that idea of thought crime, certainly this bill raises the spectre of that, the policing of opinions. And
you can see, sorry to interrupt, Jamie, but you can see a situation, again, Orwellian, I often say that, an Orwellian minister of truth, because that's where you end up. But you can see a situation where this will become, as John said, it will become all-pervading, so difficult to police. And it won't just be the media that will be caught, it will be all aspects of life. They'll have to teach it in schools. You can't say this, you're not allowed to say that. This is what's acceptable, because otherwise people are going to be out there and breaking the law all the time. And it's unpoliceable, but we will go through some pretty nasty times if it comes in before someone wakes up and says that this is ridiculous. Yeah.
Yes, it's unenforceable, as you say. So in the last few years, there has been other legislation which the Scottish Government has taken forward, which has ended up giving them quite a large headache. So you had the Offensive Behaviour at Football Act, similarly problematic when it came to free speech, and that was eventually repealed. And then you also had the named person scheme, which is slightly unrelated, but that went to the courts and it was ruled sort of contrary to human rights law. What is your opinion on what's going on with the Scottish Government? A lot of people would say that there's an increasingly authoritarian edge to the government in Scotland, and it's manifested in these kind of legislative proposals. Now, obviously, John, you're a Conservative councillor, so you've got a slight bias here, but Ian maybe less so. Because
I think that's a difficult one for me to answer, because that's getting into the political sphere of those kind of things. But I would say that it's not restricted to the Scottish Government for bringing in laws that you step back and say, but you're impinging. And I've mentioned about the UK government's online harms bill, which for all the best of intentions, one hopes, although I think to actually say that all politicians, go into this perhaps a little blinkered. No. I think some of them go in with their eyes very wide open. This is we could use this at some point to do. But I think all governments like to do that, don't they? They like to be authoritarian at times to get their things through. It's just unfortunate that we've got something here that if you're an authoritarian government with a large majority, which the Scottish Government can push something through, which they may very much later regret. And one of the problems, of course, is when you come out with something like this, it becomes almost a point of honour for politicians of all colours that, we're not going to do a U-turn. We're hearing a lot about U-turns at the moment. It seems anything. And look, let's be fair about this. This is put forward as a bill. It's up for discussion. And so the government in Scotland can come forward and say, thank you very much, we've had this, and we've changed it, we've listened, and we've done that, and we've taken things into account. I may be wishful thinking here, but that maybe it is. And I think all governments and politicians now are fearful of that being turned as watered down, or they've done a U-turn on this. When really these were up for discussions. We're seeing it an awful lot with the London-based government, of course, the British government. Any progression going forward regarding how to deal with COVID is seen as a U-turn, when really just scientific, information has changed, as it were. But I think you do find them entrenched, and I suppose the more authoritarian they are, the more when it really should go the other way, which is like we're comfortable, we've got a majority, we can be sensible about this. One hopes that they would be.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with a bit of humility in politics, is there?
But that's always seen as weakness, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a problem.
Politicians, it's always the case of we want our politicians to have humility. We want them to compromise. They want them to do this, and the moment they do it, they're portrayed as weak.
John, hold back a bit if you can.
No, not at all. I don't. It's not what I was going to say. I mean, the problem with politicians is that that they always need to be seen to be doing something.
Yeah.
And the risk is always, given that, especially in government, where they're receiving lots and lots of approaches from pressure groups, lobbyists, and private individuals to do something about a particular problem. And the politicians themselves have their own beliefs and their own priorities. The common thread in the examples that you cite is that they all had good intentions at their heart. It was the consequences of trying to legislate in areas which are very difficult and not fully accepting that the consequences of the legislation where the negative consequences were greater than the problems that they sought to solve. And I mean, I wouldn't necessarily use the word authoritarian, but what I would say the common thread is that a belief that government can solve all problems by legislation, and that's not the case. But politicians in power will seek to use legislation to tackle the problems which they see as genuine. And I don't deny that in this case that Humza Yousaf sees a real problem that he wants to tackle. The problem is that the legislation as framed takes it so much further forward than the issue that he's seeking to tackle, that it ends up being a dangerous and indeed pointless piece of legislation. The advantage, obviously, that we have certainly just now is that because the SNP is not in the majority position, it would require the support of another party to get this legislation through, and also it has to go through the committee stage. I think that the committee stage will be a very, very difficult process for this piece of law.
Yeah.
And I also think that given the liberalising background to the defamation reform bill, which the Green Party have been particularly involved in, as you probably know, I don't think that I don't think this legislation will survive the Parliament. Clearly, we don't know what the outcome of the election in May will be. But if I was to take a punt on this, I would say the legislation will be parked.
Yeah.
And may well be reintroduced following the next election, if the SNP was in a position to do that. But if I was being smart about this, and I was in their position, I'd withdraw the legislation now, and say that it's not the time, and it could form part of the manifesto and all of that kind of stuff. But it is such a problem piece of legislation that it's just an absolutely golden opportunity for the opposition going into an election campaign. I mean, if I was SNP leadership, I'd get rid of it now and say, let's just leave this and see what happens in the election. Let's not create a problem for ourselves, which we just don't need right now. Yeah. As it stands, the legislation's undeliverable, and I don't think it would get through this Parliament. So what's the point?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, Aaron. They are. obviously shooting themselves in the foot with this legislation, which has been so unpopular. And previously, you had the gender recognition bill, which did prove very controversial, just like this bill, and they did park that because they realised how toxic it was becoming, including within their own party.
In their own party. Their own party. That's the problem.
Yeah, and it's possible actually. I'm not aware of any individuals in the party just now, but it's possible that it's the same thing is happening with the hate crime bill, that there is a strong cohort within the SNP who see the problems with the legislation and would be urging the leadership to stop it. So both of you,
if you're a pragmatist, you'd say bin it.
Yes, absolutely. Now, both of you have probably made representations to the government or to the Justice Committee, which held a call for views a couple of months back. John, you're speaking there about how it's going to be a difficult process for the legislation, and I think that's right, because the balance of the committee is not in the SNP's favour. And I think John Finney, actually, a Green MSP, will be one of the key people on that committee to see where he comes down.
He's an ex-policeman.
He's an ex-cop. Yeah, he understands it. Yeah. And you've got James Kelly as well from Labour, who was involved with the Football Act. So you would like to see it parked. Well, I mean, we would like to see it scrapped and not come back. What would you say to committee members? If you could speak to them, let's say that they decided that it should go forward but be amended. What kind of amendments or changes do you think they could make that would actually soften the blow to free speech, if you like? Or do you think it's not possible?
I go along with the Faculty of Advocates, and I think that their opinion was written by Roddy Dunlop, QC, who is the
new dean,
the authority in freedom of speech legislation, and their conclusion was that it's not amendable. It will just amendments will just tuck it up further and further and further. There will be, every alley it tries to square off will just open up another one. I'm not sure where they can go with it. There are bits of it which obviously the blasphemy stuff and all the rest of it which are worthwhile. But I think trying to amend Section 2 just ends up with a piece of legislation which has very little purpose behind it, and so I'm not sure. I mean, my message to the committee would be: don't listen to me. Listen to the Law Society of Scotland. Listen to the Faculty of Advocates. Listen to the Scottish Police Federation. Every agency who is necessary to make sure this law works all say it's bad law. And if those three say it's bad law, it's pretty much bad law.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I would agree with John on that. I don't think it can be tinkered with. I think it's, while the central premise is there that would allow all these vexatious challenges to publishers, broadcasters, while any of that remains, it's just going to become the nightmare. And you can tinker around and you can give assurances about, it doesn't affect the media, but it will. I just think it should be scrapped, just completely. Of course, as the face saving, we'll park it because we've got more important things to do before May. Absolutely fine. But better if they just scrapped it completely, because if I was a political person and I was looking at it from that, I thought John's analysis, that was spot on. It's not the kind of thing you want to go into an election with that's there if it's just so unpopular. You want the comedians on your side, not actually attacking you during the campaign. And even if it's still on the shelf, there's still this is what they want to do, but if you put them back in, they're going to do it, kind of thing. So just scrap it.
Let it die a slow death. Okay, well, one more question for you guys. We're almost there. So in our own output on the bill, we do make the point, as you two have as well, that there are good intentions behind this legislation. We do believe that Humza Yousaf has good intentions. He's a man that's been subjected to hatred in his life himself, as an Asian man living in Glasgow. Hatred and prejudice are obviously a problem in Scotland, like other parts of the UK as well. in one sense, there's always going to be hatred and prejudice. As people who've worked in journalism and who've had to sort of look at government policy over several years, maybe a couple of decades, what do you think is the right approach to tackling prejudice in society? Do you think it's a legislative approach? Do you think it's a cultural approach? What would you say to the government as a sort of answer to what they're trying to address?
Yeah.
From my own point, sorry, John, you go. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I mean, it's very much a cultural and educational question. I think that the law is the criminal law is a very, very blunt instrument to achieve instant change on attitudes which may be long ingrained, and in many ways exacerbates the problem, because you're being told that you can't think the way you think because it's against the law, rather than you can't think the way you think because actually it's not right. And it's not, and you lose the ability to persuade as soon as you say it's against the law. Doesn't matter what you think. Doesn't matter what your views are. It's just against the law. That's all you need to know. You do this, you go to jail. So you lose the ability to engage properly when you go law first, rather than continue to address societal problems and attitudes which are better tackled from an engagement and an education and a cultural point of view. Now, that won't necessarily bring about the instant results that you seek as a politician, but nonetheless, it's the right way to go. And I think in many ways, social media is exacerbating the problem. So how widespread is the problem actually that you're seeking to tackle? How many people hold views that you wish to change? And I'm not so sure that if you looked at the population as a whole, that you would find that the problem is as big as requiring the intervention of the criminal law. I think it's a question of balance, and what are you seeking to do, and is it proportionate to the reality of the problem rather than the problem that you perceive?
I would agree with John on that. I think that personal viewpoint is society, once it reaches a stage, and it can always look to, shall we do more, but once it reaches a stage where it is enshrined in law about equality, that racial discrimination is not legal, gender discrimination is not legal. Once you've reached that and said that this is the state, we accept that in law, we recognise that we should have done it a hell of a long time ago, but that is what is there. Afterwards, then it's a cultural thing, it's an educational thing. And if you then bring in draconian laws like this that says you're not even allowed to think this way, we're going to shut down anyone that wants to talk about all this. That is I wonder why. They won't even let me talk about it. They won't even let me debate it or let me hear the other points of view. And then if it is the right way, shall we say, that society should be, that's what comes to the fore. That's what comes to the fore in an open debate, a mature debate that goes on there. If you stifle it down and say, this is the way to do it, and you are not allowed to discuss another way, and we will put you in jail if you do it. And I in conversations with people, I point to occasionally to Germany, where they have laws, of course, they can jail you if you are a Holocaust denier. Let me just say for one single moment, I'm not a Holocaust denier, but is that the best way to deal with it, rather than the argument and the proof? If someone says, oh, the Holocaust did not take place, say, no, here it is. This is what happened. Rather than put you in jail, make martyrs of you for Nazi sympathizers, etc. I just don't think that works. It doesn't work. You've got to allow open debate on issues, and the right way will come forward in that open debate. Yeah.
That's a classical liberal approach to free speech, isn't it? That if you suppress stuff, then it festers under the surface and it grows. And the way to defeat hatred is to challenge it out in the open and to call it out and to, you know, come to a consensus as a society. One of the other points I've seen made about the criminal law approach is that it's very detrimental to the offender themselves. So if you're a young person and, you know, you say something stupid and you end up in court and you maybe even get jailed for it, that has a huge impact on your life. You know, that's going to change the course of your life, and it's a very serious thing. And as John said, you know, maybe it's more of a cultural thing where in education we need to be convincing people of why certain views are bad and wrong, rather than coming down on them like a ton of bricks through the criminal law. What are your thoughts on that?
I
agree.
Yeah,
I agree that it's not, of course, it's not just if this law becomes law but also because people that are usually younger making stupid comments on social media, which then come back to haunt them later on in life when they have matured. And you know, we're reaching a point where no one is allowed to actually change their mind, be educated, and become a more rounded human being. It's you said that stupid thing when you were 17, so that's it. That's you done for life. And to actually bring, that's a difficult enough one to get over. But to actually then enshrine it in law, not only did you say something stupid when you were 18 years old, but you actually got a criminal record because of it. Yeah, where do you go from there? The thought police are not far behind.
Okay, well, any further thoughts? No. Okay, we'll call it a day there. Thanks again for speaking to me, and yeah, I wish you all the best in your own work and your own representations on the bill. And yeah, thanks for tuning in, everyone who's watching this today.
okay, cheers, Jamie.